So with that, I want to talk about our next great event here. In 2021, the University of Missouri-St. Louis signed an educational partnership agreement with the NGA, which outlined UMSL's commitment to help create a geospatial talent pipeline for this region. That was also when I became acquainted with then NGA Director, Vice Admiral Robert D. Sharp, who was the co-signer of that agreement. Since then, Bob retired from the Navy, but remained very involved with the St. Louis geospatial community, and last year he agreed to join UMSL, serving as a research fellow with the UMSL Geospatial Collaborative. Bob is an outstanding and generous partner who is helping to guide the university's effort in K-16 workforce and talent development, while working with leadership and staff at the UMSL Geospatial Collaborative to strengthen and expand partnerships. And Bob is here this morning serving as the moderator of our first panel discussion. So everyone, it is my pleasure to introduce retired Vice Admiral Robert Sharp, Research Fellow with the University of Missouri-St. Louis Geospatial Collaborative.
Thank you so much. I did not see that coming. Come on up. I didn't know I was going to have a big picture of my bald head up there on the screen. What a great morning, you know, and it is, it's fantastic if you think about the fact that this just started last November, you know, and here we are today. And I can tell you, for those of us involved in some of the discussions, we were like, hey, we should do something together, right? And then it was like, well, what should we do? Well, we should do something. And then we had this discussion on, can we really do something like by June, right? We're like, why not, right? And I love to be around people that are focused that way, right? We use the Nike slogan, just do it, right? And that's what I love about this sort of gathering is the eclectic nature of who you all represent and the fact that you start to meet people that you haven't met before and you start to make connections that didn't exist and you continue to do great things, you know, for this nation and for the globe. So it's just a tremendous honor to be here. I want to thank American Geographical Society and University of Missouri-St. Louis for putting together this sort of partnership, right? And just having that conversation on, I don't know what we could do together, but we could do something and we should do something, and then following through and making it be so. This is the first panel of the day, and as I was telling the team, first and best ever, right? We will set the bar high, and I think as you get to meet these individuals, you will see what a great team this is and a great way to tee up the conversations that we're going to be having here today and tomorrow. And they just really represent a tremendous talented group. And it was a personal pleasure and honor for me to be allowed this opportunity to moderate and to have this discussion here over the next 50 minutes or so. If you're feeling left out, like I didn't thank you, I thank all of you as well for being here. So pat yourselves on the back. But I'll also give you a task. Whenever I come to a forum like this, I always challenge every single person to meet somebody, at least one person, that you didn't know from before, right? Exchange contact data and then remain in contact, right? And grow that network of like-minded individuals that are committed to making the world a better place. So with that being said, we're going to kick right into the panel. Members here, they each have a short presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A if time permits. I want to start off by introducing Miss Abigail Fitzgibbon, right here to my left. She is a product engineer at Esri, and we were just discussing this. Most people just say Esri, and they don't even know it like stands for something. It's like Environmental Science System Research Institute. Esri sounds better. And if people don't know Esri, all you have to say is ArcGIS, and people are like, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're from. She's fairly new to the profession, right, in years, but certainly not in passion, and she's already recognized expert, which had her speaking on the stage in New York City, and then joining us for this panel as well. She's also a success story of something I'm really passionate about, because she started with Esri as an intern. So let's hear it for intern programs. While attending UCLA, and she found her passion, which is in research related to climate, to agriculture, to conflict, hopefully preventing conflict. And she's the perfect person to stand up here and kick off this session, you know. And we were talking about this. Jack Dangermond, he and his wife started Esri over 50 years ago, and it's a phenomenal story of what they've grown it into. Just passionate people about making the world a better place. And a few years ago, Jack inadvertently at St. Louis University revealed a slogan they were coming out with 3 months after. And he was talking about the power of geospatial perspective and geospatial approaches, or he uses geographic perspective and approaches to see what others can't. And we all went, ooh, that's really brilliant, right? The power of the tools to see what others can't. And he said, forget I said that. I'm not supposed to talk about that. But Abby, if you could kick us off by letting us know how you use those tools, that technology, to see what others can't, and specifically how you use it to understand climate today, projected in the future, and how that impacts agriculture.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob, for such a warm introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all here today. And I'll be talking about, do we have the slides? Wonderful. I'll be talking about a topic that is really close to my heart from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint. And this is how climate change will impact US and global agriculture, and particularly how we can leverage geospatial tools to help us answer those questions. And like I said, this is something that is personally close to me. So I got my start and my interest in this topic working on farms throughout high school and college. I worked on farms for about 6 years in Massachusetts. And this is a particular summer day. I took this photo myself in August of 2020, and you'll notice the sky looks a little bit weird. In fact, California and Canadian wildfires were almost completely obscuring the sun and making working conditions here pretty hazardous for this particular week. And now this is just a small vignette into the ways that climate will impact agriculture and agricultural labor. And it got me thinking a lot about what are the broader patterns that we can see from this. And wildfire is just one kind of component, but when we talk about the impacts of climate change, we're really thinking a lot about warming, and particularly the impact of warming across the United States. So we all know that climate change will touch every corner of the globe, but when it comes to warming particularly, there are some areas that will be disproportionately impacted. And one of those areas is right here in the central and particularly northern United States. Warming in this part of the region could warm, up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit with our worst climate predictions by middle of century. So when we talk about climate change on these very agriculturally productive parts of the world, we're really thinking about the cascading geopolitical and social impacts that can come from that. And of course, agriculture is a very complex system involving a lot of soil science, labor markets, water, etc., and a lot of geopolitics as well. These are a few projects I've worked on recently. We're thinking about burned wheat fields in Ukraine due to the conflict there. We're talking about the massive control of Russian exports and their influence across particularly South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, our climate story. This one is looking at warm season precipitation and how it will tremendously increase by middle of century as the world gets not only warmer, but also a lot wetter. So we have all these new and emerging crises appearing to us in agriculture. But the good thing about it is they're all highly spatial, which gives us the tools to really dive deep and begin to tackle these issues in a geographic approach. So like I say, GIS really puts agriculture on the map, allowing us to spot trends that otherwise wouldn't be visible to the naked eye, or if you were doing this type of work, particularly in just a computer program or an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. So you really need to see the patterns and able to understand how these systems influence one another. So I'll be talking about a little bit of my research looking at the impacts of climate change on US corn yields. We'll be walking you through all the entire process of a geospatial workflow, beginning a good place to start with some satellite imagery, bringing it into a geospatial environment and enriching it with climate and other ecological data sets, and finally plugging it into a machine learning algorithm that will allow us to find correlation between current corn extents and environmental characteristics. So beginning with our imagery, I love this image because it shows us exactly how much agriculture stands out when you just look at one of these true color images. We truly have such a profound impact on our environment. This is a particular cornfield in Idaho. And I can bring it into a geospatial environment and look particularly at what crops are growing exactly where. This is the USDA's USA cropland layer, and everywhere you see in yellow is a cornfield. Bringing in some GIS tools, I can create a sample of points right here. Each one of the points in yellow represents a cornfield, and in each one of those points, I've drilled down to provide environmental attributes. You can see things like mean summer temperature, slope, soil type, etc. So this is how we can leverage geography and a geographic approach to see trends that only really exist when you see them in space. Finally, I'll be plugging this into a machine learning model that will take our extent of corn, compare it to different environmental and temperature thresholds, and then create a prediction. And one of the great things about GIS is it allows us to kind of create this reproducible science. So I can easily modify or swap in and out different variables to test different conditions, and that's what we'll be looking at when we get to the impacts of climate change. And this is our baseline prediction. So running my model with our current climate data, this is the trends we see for current corn suitability across the United States. And it looks pretty much exactly like you'd expect. You can see a lot of the Midwest, and particularly the St. Louis area here, light up in dark green for high corn suitability. But once I swap out my current data for my future data, we see a bleak picture emerge. So this is how corn suitability moves north due to climate change. So essentially, corn is trying to follow the temperatures in which it's comfortable, even as those temperatures move further and further north into Canada. And again, we can see a lot of risk, particularly around this part of the country, most of that risk attributed to the very high jump in summer temperatures. I can run a linear regression and compare my results with our USDA Census of Agriculture data to actually quantify how much risk we have in terms of bushels of corn produced. This gives us a really good glimpse into the future and allows us to bring in the kind of economic and socioeconomic components of this. And finally, like I said, unlike other mechanistic models that can do really precise agricultural forecasting and modeling, GIS gives us the capabilities to easily swap in not only different types of climate data, but also different inputs. So I've rerun my model on corn and winter wheat, soybeans and winter wheat, and we can see the comparative changes between these different crops. So for example, while corn is one of our most at-risk crops due to climate change, soybeans proved to be a little bit more resilient, and finally winter wheat could actually expand and increase in yields due to warming temperatures. And we can see over on the left here, the comparative shifts in those crops. So this is where we get into kind of the economics of agriculture and how it may be more economically viable in, say, central Iowa to switch from farming corn to soy as one crop increases in suitability and another decreases. And finally, I can test different adaptation measures. So here we're looking at the comparative impacts of heat adaptations like early planting and water adaptations like supplemental irrigation. And what's important is we can not only run this for different crops, but these adaptations are highly spatial, and you need a geographic approach to really understand where exactly different adaptations can do the most good. You don't want to plant early everywhere in the United States. You want to target that adaptation to a particular region of the country. You don't want to irrigate across the board if it's going to be wetter in some places and drier than others. You need to geographically target the adaptations that you're going to do to make our agriculture as resilient as possible to climate change. And finally, this work is all possible to be done in different environments. This is some field collection data from Malawi, where I've been modeling maize outputs using data we've collected through ArcGIS Product Survey 123. And I've done this model across the world as well, looking at trends in global wheat forecasting. And just like in the US, running this model across the world paints a pretty bleak picture as well. I'm really curious about how we can use an ecological tool like this, like species distribution modeling, and see its potential geopolitical impacts. We see that in much of the world, particularly in the developing world around the tropics and subtropics, wheat suitability decreases pretty precipitously. But it actually increases in places like Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia, which will kind of play out in an interesting way as these places get kind of a greater monopoly on our food system and how that will cascade down to countries that rely on those areas for imports. But I want to leave us on a more hopeful note, because I think that's very much warranted. So we've been talking a lot about the disastrous and dangerous impacts of climate change today, but we have a lot of reasons to be hopeful. And as we are sitting here discussing these topics, I think that's important to point out. One of them is we have a lot more and better data when it comes to ecology and agriculture specifically, and we'll hear a lot about that today. We have higher resolution satellite imagery, we have more precise tools that can help us understand these problems and prepare for their impacts. And these tools are becoming easier to use. So for example, the modeling that I have shown today is something that is easily integrated into ArcGIS. Previously, actually just a year ago, you would have had to use a very complex computer programming system to actually do that type of modeling. And it was completely blind, which is to say it wasn't spatial at all. You couldn't see the results on a map, and I'd like to say that that's like doing surgery when you're blindfolded. You can't see what you're doing, you can't see your impacts. And as these tools become easier to use, you can have a kind of more nimble research team that are able to leverage these. You can have your ecologists doing the modeling themselves and understanding the impacts right there. And finally, second to last, we have advances in ag tech. Every single day, we're making huge leaps in genetic modification and how these will make our crops resilient to climate change and high temperature stress. And finally, more awareness and concern. And that's what brings together everyone in this room today. I'm so excited to hear from the rest of my panelists and everyone else here about the different solutions they are all researching when it comes to agriculture and agricultural suitability and productivity. It really takes a diverse set of disciplines to create the solutions that we need to create a sustainable future. And so I'm so excited to hear what everyone else has to say on this topic this morning. So with that, thank you, and I'll pass it off to my other panelists.
Thanks, Abby. See, I told you were going to be wowed and impressed, and I hope we didn't disappoint there. What a great way to kick this off. Really a great demonstration of how we can use technology, right, to be predictive and see how we can improve agriculture and food sustainability in these issues. And I love the fact that while you were in college, you were thinking about the geopolitical implications of that, right? Because it is security. You know, people will fight over food, but if you can predict and make corrections in advance, you can avoid those problems, right? Instead of responding, you can be proactive. Our next panelist, Aakash Parekh, who was doing an interview this morning talking about some great business developments and then dashed here to be with us. And I had the pleasure of spending some time with Aakash last week. He was a golden ticket winner for USGIF's Symposium. That's a great program where you can apply, highlighting the some of your young talent, and they select individuals and bring them in and invest time and energy in professional development, to include a mock cocktail hour and all these things. So it's great to have you back out here in St. Louis 2 weeks in a row. And you're leaving today to travel and get around. But we were talking about the importance and the power of geospatial or geographic observations, right? And understanding what's happening where. And Abby was demonstrating the power of layering different data sets and looking at those data sets. And she's talking about the advancement in some of the ways that we observe. And Aakash is the Chief Commercial Officer for Pixxel. And you should recognize that name because they're one of our sponsors. Thank you. And they are a space data company that's looking at fielding the world's first satellite constellation, commercial constellation in hyperspectral. Right? And a lot of people do not understand what hyperspectral is because it's hard. But it is another example of when you look at things through a different lens, all of a sudden you start to see things that you didn't see, without that phenomenology or that unique look to it. So Aakash, if you could just, one, make us educated about Pixxel and what you're doing in hyperspectral, what it is, and the contributions it really makes to the agriculture industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob, for that warm introduction, and it's excellent to be here. This actually goes back to a few personal roots because I have a background in ag tech, and I've spent years living on farms working with smallholder farmers. So to be able to go upstream and work with Pixxel to bring hyperspectral data and that remote sensing data set to be able to take a closer look at what's going on farms is a big part of my personal mission, so I really appreciate it. Pixxel started in 2019 when we were trying to use today's remote sensing data sets to be able to model basic environmental issues. So we wanted to take a look at air quality. We wanted to take a look at water pollution levels. We wanted to take a look at stress levels in crops to be able to better predict the yield. And we realized that there was always some sort of trade-off in today's Earth observation data sets. Either the spatial resolutions were too coarse, so we were not able to view a certain occurrence with adequate granularity, or the temporal resolutions were not frequent enough for us to be able to meaningfully monitor change. Especially when things are changing daily on the fields, it's really important to be able to have that cadence. And finally, there wasn't enough spectral detail to be able to discern the properties and materials and chemicals that really mattered. So to be able to catch stress in a crop earlier before it's available physically by when it's too late maybe to be able to fix it, to be able to divide soil into zones and to be able to look at what the nutrition content is for variable rate applications. All of those aspects were lacking, and it was a very expensive and cumbersome exercise to be able to do it through sensors and manual intervention and being able to send deployment teams. So that's really what inspired the Pixxel constellation. And the goal was to be able to build a health monitor for the planet, right? To be able to detect, monitor, and predict what is happening around the world every day at an unprecedented level of detail from space. We ultimately realized that we needed a much better class of satellites that can detect and quantify some of the problems that I just listed. So this is a visual illustration of what's seen today. So we can see basic crop health with open source data. We're able to look at, we're able to compute an NDVI index, so we're able to look at chlorophyll levels, the greenness. But what we really need is the detailed pest and disease maps. With basic pipeline, what we really need is to be able to quantify oil and gas leaks, to be able to look at methane and greenhouse gases. And finally, we need concentration maps of harmful chemicals on water to be able to really do something about this at scale. Which is why Pixxel is the world's first and highest resolution hyperspectral constellation. In order to be able to make this happen, we realized that we needed 4 pillars to really be sound. One was we needed global coverage, so to be able to monitor multiple phenomenologies, and that covered access to every part of the planet. The second was we needed the ideal spatial, spectral, and temporal resolution. So it's really that combination of things that makes something come to life. So we wanted to have a 5-meter hyperspectral data set. So at a 5-meter spatial resolution, being able to look at 300 different bands and wavelengths, which will give you the biophysical and the biochemical changes in vegetation and crops. And finally, we wanted to have enabled daily global access to be able to look at any kind of emergency response or to be able to look at the sudden outbreak of a pest or a disease on the field. And these events are extremely time sensitive. And if satellite data isn't there when you need it to be able to serve you, then it almost has the opposite effect, right, to the investment that it takes to be able to put these constellations up there. So as a result, we've launched 3 Pathfinder satellites already. So we're the world's first commercial hyperspectral constellation on orbit that's already beaming down data and has been through its commissioning phases. We have 30-meter and 10-meter Pathfinder cameras that are beaming down hyperspectral data sets, and our flagship 5-meter constellation launches in the first quarter of 2024. So to your point, Bob, what makes hyperspectral really special? Typically speaking, we are used to looking at information around us in 3 wavelengths, right? In RGB. That's typically what the naked eye can see. That's what you can see from your phone camera. So you're able to see color, you're able to see dimensions of certain objects. We then have the multispectral data sets, which are what today's Earth observation satellites really cover. So they cover information in about 10 to 20 different wavelengths or channels. So through that, you're able to now start being able to see, for example, what the various land use types are. So differentiating a field from a forest from a water body, for example. You're able to see basic things like greenness. So looking at a few characteristics as far as the canopy is concerned. And finally, with hyperspectral, you have information in hundreds of different wavelengths. This is basically where you can start looking at material science applications from space. And because of this spectral fidelity, you're able to start seeing things that the naked eye otherwise can't see, which is why our tagline is seeing the unseen. So you're able to see biophysical and biochemical changes, aerosols in the atmosphere to be able to look at the presence of greenhouse gases, looking at things like carotenoids, looking at protein or lignin indicators. We all in this room know that there are so many variables to agriculture and why a certain crop can fail. It could be because of farm practices, it could be because of the genetic makeup of the seed, improper fertigation, weather and environmental conditions. So the more you can detect, the more variables that you can start looking at from space, the more holistic your judgment is to be able to do some sort of root cause analysis. And with hyperspectral, we have those many variables that are actually covered in the spectrum. So this is an example of Lake Geneva. So on the left here, you can see the lake that's captured using today's satellites. And this is what the power of hyperspectral is. So you're able to start seeing algal blooms, chemical contamination levels, etc. We cover the 400 to 2500 nanometer range in 250 bands, and we have broad coverage. So we can look at monitoring, states, and we can look at counties, and we can look at monitoring countries. It's not just about smaller farms. And we also have a platform, which is a no-code intuitive environment. So anybody with basic remote sensing knowledge can be able to start looking at ingesting this data, combining it with other data sets to be able to extract insights from it. These are images from our Pathfinder. So this is an agriculture area in Canada. Using and the processed output here, you can see is the amount of color, which actually starts showing you various properties. So again, here you can basically start taking a look at the narrow hyperspectral bands, which allow us to sort of highlight the chemical and the biological changes. So these are the various indices that we've been able to compute. Within this, you can start looking at properties such as lignin, protein, carotenoids, starch. You can start looking at water absorption levels. And all of this before it's physically visible on the crop, which is when it would be picked up by RGB or multispectral. And by then it's too late because stress has basically, it's now come to a point where it's very difficult to be able to fix it. So prevention is better than cure, and to be able to mitigate it early, to be able to minimize the food wastage on the field, we're able to predict all of this stuff much earlier now with hyperspectral. Okay, that brings me to the end of it. Thank you so much.
Picture's worth 1,000 words, and it really does. When you go through those filters, it's undeniable when you see that change, right? You're looking at it from one view, and then all of a sudden you look at it differently, and all of a sudden it's that aha moment. You're like, oh wait, there's something here that we weren't seeing. And once again, just as Abby was highlighting, when you can do things like this, you can be predictive, right? When you look at, here's what it looked like before, here's what it's looking like now, here's what it may look like in the future. Is that acceptable or not acceptable? It's really powerful, and we'll talk about this a little bit as we get into Q&A, just that the way that the world is changing, right, and the way that technology's becoming available and democratized, or more available the tools are, so people can start to use these things, right, to improve the way that they do business. And which brings us to our next panelist, and Ian Warner, and he's got a really cool title here. I saw he is the Director of Industry Workforce Development, so people things, right? And innovation for emerging technologies, and for Trimble. And I had to admit to Ian that I had not heard of Trimble before, right? And but I went to their website, and there's a great saying on there. It says, "Too much work in the way we work," right? We have too much work in the way we work, and they're a company that is committed to looking at technology and how you use that technology to improve the way we work, right? To the time we spend doing things, workflows, and they do so, which brought him to Trimble in the construction field, when you hear some of his background, but also in agriculture and geospatial, and which is his passion and why he's here today. So if you could make us a little, for those who, like me, who didn't know much about Trimble, talk about what the company does and how you are looking at emerging technologies to continually innovate and improve the way we're leveraging technology to be far more effective and efficient in how we're doing things like agriculture. Thanks, Ian. And he ran with me in Forest Park this morning.
Bob kicked my butt this morning.
No, I
already,
didn't.
so I'm still sweating on the way here. How's everybody doing this morning? Doing good? Good. All right. We need some energy in here. Get everybody excited. The coffee's starting to kick in. So, Bob, thank you for the great introduction. Thank you, everybody, for having us here today. And I will give you guys a little bit of background on Trimble. So, we're one of the probably largest technology companies a lot of people haven't heard of. So, we'll try to get you some of the background here as well. How many people were in New York City in November with us? All right, good. So I can repeat the entire presentation. Perfect. So Trimble's about a $4 billion company, started in 1978. We were the first ones to take GPS out to the civilian market. So Charlie Trimble actually bought the patent from Hewlett-Packard back in the day in 78 and started the company. And he took the GPS technology straight out to surveyors and kind of served that market. And we've grown ever since. So I think we're on our third CEO in 45 years. Poor Rob Painter took over in January of 2020, so he's already put on 20 years in the last 3, I think, but he's doing great. So, but we have partnerships in almost every country on the planet. We have customers in almost every country on the planet, and we have a ton of R&D and investments, not only here in the U.S., but across the world as well. So we basically divide our company into 4 major divisions: construction, which is kind of my background and where I came from; geospatial, which is what the company was kind of founded on; and then transportation and agriculture. So we'll kind of talk about these in a little bit, but basically what we're using is that GPS and high precision technology to find out exact locations, and then we use that exact location to kind of smooth out the workflows for a lot of these industries that were very tech averse, right? They're starting more and more to accept the technology into their workflows. But when we started in these fields in the 70s, 80s, 90s, many of these industries pretty much gave you not quite the middle finger, but they really did not want to incorporate technology into the workflows. So this is an image of a mural that we actually have in the Westminster campus, and so this is on our agriculture floor. And every day I get to go into the office and look at this. I think it's a beautiful image, and then I got to put on some of the stats here. But Trimble's in over 180 million acres across the world. We've got over 115,000 implements that are actually in our database, and that may not sound like a lot, but I'll show you on the next image why that's really important. And then we go across 100 OEMs, so original equipment manufacturers. So not just the big ones that we know in the U.S., like Deere and Case and New Holland and so forth, but all the other folks that you might have never heard of, and quite a few in Europe as well. We're actually, we have a carbon market that we utilize for a lot of the agriculture customers out there, so we can actually utilize a lot of the carbon credits and get those credits to the farmers so they can use that as another source of income in addition to their crop health and everything else they're working on there as well. One of our big strengths is the partnerships that we have and our reseller network. So over 2,400 partners just on the agricultural side. I think we have over 1,000 just on the geospatial side, and then several hundred with the partnership with Caterpillar and a few other folks out there as well. So when we're talking about 114,000 implements and then 4,300 platforms that we're going across in the agricultural world, if you think about that, almost every one of these devices have to come into play. So it may not be every one of these devices, but you'll have a combination of these on every implement and every platform that the farmers are actually using out in the fields. So this is a big deal, and trying to make sure all these things interact and are able to communicate using the ISOBus and a few other industry platforms that make sure that they can talk to any different implement across the time frame of implements. So nowadays, a lot of these tractors and the OEM groups are actually putting in a lot of the sensors and the receivers and GNSS receivers, so forth, on the actual equipment before it comes out of the factory. But you still have to think about the tens of thousands and millions of implements that are already out there that we can still update and make technology advances on those as well. So we're talking a lot about, I think we'll hear more about this here later today, but automation in the agricultural world. So we have a Trimble Venture Fund, $200 million fund that we started out 3 or 4 years ago, and the first 2 investments were actually in ag tech. So with Sabanto, they work on swarm farming and farming as a service, and so they actually will take these tractors, they're automated, and take multiple tractors and do the work out in the field on some low horsepower type of technology out there as well. Monarch is another one that we invested in, so smaller tractors going into crop fields such as orange plantations, apple plantations, wineries and so forth, so very narrow wheelbase, and then still automated, so we can automate those, control them from a computer almost anywhere in the world, but you can still jump onto the cab and run the tractor manually if you have to in a worst case scenario. We made an acquisition for a company called Bilberry just late last year, and this one actually utilizes microsensors and cameras and AI technology to actually look at the different crops and compare the colorization, and in real time make the decision whether or not we spray that with herbicide or chemicals or whatever we need to, and we can reduce those usage of herbicides and chemicals down to about 90% in some cases when you're going across a field. So very prescriptive, very precise positioning of fertigation and your other sprays as well. So this is just across the agriculture sector. We actually started doing this in the civil world back in the 90s. We were able to control gigantic machines, earth-moving machines, and when you think about farms, that's one of the main things that they're doing at the very beginning is they actually have to grade out all their different fields so that you can retain the the rainfall and so forth, and make sure you're running your water across the field in a sustainable fashion. So I actually, I came from the construction world, studied architecture, got into construction, worked in the field for quite a while, but I actually grew up on my grandfather's farm in Kansas, in north central Kansas. I'm wearing my, Superman socks here. I'm kind of hiding those from everybody, but, I still relate to Superman growing up on a farm in Kansas. But, my grandfather, he had multiple machines across the entire spectrum, so when you're thinking about automating the machines and the different platforms and trying to combine all those different platforms together, most farmers can't afford to just stick with one manufacturer, right? They go to an auction, they pick up whatever piece of implement or tractor or multiple combines. We always bought two because we had one for parts and then one to actually run. So, the poor farmers are out there trying to figure out what they're doing all the time. But trying to take some of that information and apply it to the workforce development world, I work in construction. I worked in construction for about 15 years in the commercial side. Right now, they're estimating we're short about 1 million workers just in the U.S. alone to work on the infrastructure bill, the IRA bill, the new chip manufacturing bill, right? So a lot of those workers are actually coming from the farms. So a lot of those folks are actually, hard workers. They work from sundown to sunup and vice versa. But those folks are actually getting pulled from the agricultural world into construction and into these other higher paying fields all the time. So something we're trying to do is work with a lot of teachers and K through 12 educators, colleges, trade schools, so forth, to try to create this curriculum so we can get the kids interested in agriculture, in surveying, in construction, and get them into those fields very early, showing them that there's actually technology in these fields. It's not just plowing with a tractor all day or digging with a shovel on a construction site, that there are some really cool applications where we're using imagery from Pixxel and Maxar and Digital Globe and so forth, and we're able to pull that into the real world, locate that with GNSS with really high precision, and then take that information and turn it into workflows and make those entire industries more efficient. So I think that is it, but we'll jump from there.
When you threw up the slide at the end, it said K through 12 and it call to action. I could see a lot of heads nodding up and down in this room. And we'll if we have some time at the end for Q&A, we'll maybe talk a little bit about this, the importance of technology, but the importance of the humans, right? And the investments that we need to make sure our future generation is prepared. And last but not least, Dr. Vasit Sahan will address us. And Vasit I've known for quite some time, ever since I've been coming out here to St. Louis. And he holds several roles over at St. Louis University. He is an associate professor at SLU's Earth and Atmospheric Science Department. He is the director of Remote Sensing Lab. And for the last year, he's also been juggling another ball, which is a big one, an acting director of the Taylor Geospatial Institute, right? And he'll talk a little bit about that. And Vasit, if you could kick us off just with a primer on what we mean by geospatial, but then also talk about why it's such an exciting time here in St. Louis to be involved in geospatial, and what the Taylor Geospatial Institute and how it's contributing to this growing ecosystem.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and Admiral Sharp and my panelists, and I'm so pleased to be here this morning. So I'm a geospatial scientist by training. I use remote sensing geospatial technologies to address a number of issues in agriculture. I use imagery to predict yield, look at water quality, predicting algae blooms using hyperspectral imagery, all cool stuff, right? And I have a very active research program in looking at improving food security, crop yield, measuring carbon sequestration and things like that. But today, my job here, as requested by my panel here, is to talk about what is geospatial and what is Taylor Geospatial Institute and how Taylor Geospatial Institute is positioned to address some of those greatest challenges we have been talking about this morning. First, before I get to that question, I would like to offer my pitch for the theme, the topic today, geospatial science and technology and the future of agriculture, right? So we face a grand challenge. And the reality is we have to feed the growing population. To do that, we have to produce 70% more food by 2050. And we have to do this with limited and often actually shrinking water resources, arable land. In my view, the technology is the best tool to get us there. The technology that allows us to develop better crops, so we can increase yield with minimal fertilizer input or water irrigation, right, and things like that. And then so with those imaging technologies, AI, machine learning, we can improve yield, and then we can maximize the profit for our farmers as well with data analytics and those up and coming imaging, sensing, computing technologies, right? So only then we can empower our farmers, improve the quality of life for everyone globally. There's those three images here I'm showing. 20 years ago, a lot of the farming used to be done manually by hand. And what does it mean is that we used to pick each seed and put on the ground, right? And then bury with dirt. And then when it's ready, it was ready to harvest, we used to cut wheat stalks, corn stalks by hand, tools, dry them. And like in this photo, and then we use small farm equipment like a tractor or cows, cattle, just ride them over the wheat stalks so you can smash it. Then you have to wait for a nice windy day, just right for separating the wheat kernels from its stalks by throwing them into the air, right? That was the agricultural practices or management we were doing 20 years ago, and maybe still the case. And this image actually, I took that photo, I was there to help my team to separate that wheat kernels in 2006, right? But today and the rest of the world, we moved into very heavily automated agricultural management practices. We use machinery, combines GPS technology, Trimble, all of the great tools, drone satellites, to manage our crops, to improve yield. And future even more exciting for me with AI and also robotics and the tools we are able to develop automate this process of agricultural management. So what I envision is we have drone satellites covering entire globe, hourly and anytime we have images. Those images are automatically processed on cloud, and a farmer can get crop intelligence information in a matter of minutes. In a color-coded map, red, blue, green, good, bad for yield, right? Or you need a fertilizer, or you need irrigation, this part of the crops. And not just that, like disease prediction, right? And then that like protein, fiber, the seed composition, improving that. How do we get, improved a meal and by increasing fiber and protein content in crops, right? So that's the type of future I see for the agriculture. Now, this is a little bit pixelated. So what is geospatial, right? We talked about a lot geospatial technology. We often talk about a lot geospatial. What is geospatial? It's a magic special word, and it's an adjective, but we use that for many cases, and to infer the science, to infer the technology, it works because it's so special, right? So there's two components to it. The geospatial science, right? That's a discipline that focuses on studying people, processes, and places on Earth, the Moon, and Mars, and beyond, right? Using spatially indexed time-stamped data sets. That's special right there, spatially indexed data sets, right? That's important. And it has subfields like GIS, photogrammetry, remote sensing, geomatics, GPS position, navigation, timing. Each of those subfields has its own science, right? That science, the scientists in those areas, they develop tools, the technology we use everyday life, and we also call it geospatial. But the second piece of this is the geospatial technology. And the tools you use, apps on your phone, to track your Uber driver, or track your Amazon package, find your favorite restaurant, or make a phone call. You are using satellite communications. And those technologies, geospatial technologies, that are made by scientists in geospatial science, right? So geospatial science and technology combined, that's what we often refer as geospatial. It supports 1 trillion per year global economy, right? So that's the geospatial science and technology that overlaps with computer science, engineering, mathematics, and geology, imagery science, a number of other areas. How they overlaps? Why St. Louis, the location, right? Why it's special? St. Louis has a long history in geospatial. Starts from 1200, right? Cahokia Mountains, Cahokia cities, the center of ancient civilization where grain, agricultural products were shipped to the world from here and was the epicenter of river navigation from that time. And 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition that mapped the West. And in 1943, the first footprint of NGA in St. Louis started with the production of aeronautical charts by US Air Force. And then next, of course, there are a number of other milestones, but next big milestone was in 2016. Robert Cardillo, the director of NGA at that time, made a decision to relocate NGA West, NGA St. Louis to North St. Louis, and which created a catalytic, excitement, initiatives, and opportunities for many for this town, for this region. So, group of civic leaders, representatives from academia, industry came together to form the GeoFutures Coalition in 2018 some time frame. And then the coalition published its first report in 2020, calling for a number of initiatives to make St. Louis as a global hub for geospatial science and technology. One of which is to create a world-class research collaborative, and you can find those online, right? So what does it mean to be the nation's leader in geospatial or global center of excellence in geospatial, right? And what I see is that St. Louis becoming the epicenter of new innovations in drone technologies, sensor engineering, next generation GPS positional technologies I invented here. That's the future I see in St. Louis. To do that, you have to have first-class, world-class research. And then we are able to attract talent. We are able to bring companies and promote economic development, right? So that's what Taylor Geospatial Institute is for. And we came up with a plan with the community. I presented to the chairman of Enterprise Holdings, Andrew Taylor. And with a legacy investment from Mr. Taylor, we established Taylor Geospatial Institute in April of last year. We are just 1 year old. So, and then our vision is to be the nation's academic lead in geospatial research and accelerate St. Louis's development as the global geospatial center of excellence. Our mission is to advance geospatial science, keyword is here, through multi-institutional, interdisciplinary collaborations in order to create innovative real-world solutions to societal grand challenges, which is about food security, which is about national security, water issues, health issues, right? It's a consortium of 8 outstanding research institutions in Midwest, and AMSO is a founding member of the Taylor Geospatial Institute as well. University of Missouri, University of Missouri Columbia, Missouri University of Science and Technology, UIUC, WashU, Danforth Plant Science Center, Hartsville State University. It's a SLU-led consortium of these 8 research institutions in Midwest. We are talking about 135,000 students we have in this consortium, 12,000 faculty, right, and research and all of that happening. It represents a strong convener at national global level for geospatial policies, funding, and this, that. So how do we get there? How do we build TGI as the national lead, right? So we have been investing, working hard on a number of areas. Number one priority is to build world-class interdisciplinary collaborative through numerous incentives, postdocs, funding, and many other programs, right? And establishing one of its kind geospatial data infrastructure and investing in talent, and then helping translate research into products and commercial tools. So a number of core areas, pillar areas, one of which food systems. That's what the main theme for this topic, and of core geospatial science. And that's where TGI collectively have a unique national strengths and can excel, be the leader in those areas, and one of which is food systems, right? So, and an impact, this is our 1-year impact. And again, we submit 250 million in external grant proposals in year 1, and secured 15 million, and many of which actually pending. There are many pending proposals as well. We awarded 6.4 million in collaborative research programs and incentives to our partners, hundreds of faculty, hundreds of projects we funded over the year. So that's really to say that Taylor Geospatial Institute, with our collective strengths, with our partners, are best positioned to lead research the nation and addressing the grand societal challenges such as the food security. Thank you.
It's funny because Abigail and I were talking last night, and she said, "Why St. Louis?" You know, one of the things I wish I would have had that slide. And I commend you for working Lewis and Clark and Robert Cardillo into the same timeline. I'm going to start carrying that slide with me, right? So when people ask me, I can just whip that out. We don't have time for Q&A, but I'll plant these seeds with these 4, and then when you see them during the breaks, you can ask them. One, we were talking about the importance of people, right, and investment in the future. And the special operations community has a great saying that I steal from them, but I give them credit. Humans are more important than hardware, right? So if you could, if there was like skill sets that you think are the most important for us to be investing in, what are those? Don't answer now, but ask them during the breaks. And then 2050, what does it look like, right? What looks different? And Ian and I graciously had a ride here from Dr. Rita Amir, And as we were going here, he was listening to GPS, but he got confused. The phone rang. It was Vasit. They were trying to figure out where this place was. That's right, two doctoral geospatial folks trying to find here. But Rita shared with us, when he was a student of Vasit's, that they didn't have GPS, right? So when he wanted to go someplace, he would look at a map or on a computer, and then he'd figure out, and then he'd go navigate, right? Very different now. So I'd ask you, what looks different about 2050, right? How do you visualize that? Once again, no time to answer here, but during the breaks, ask these brilliant individuals their perspective on what the future is going to look like. So thank you for this time. Once more, a round of applause for these panelists.
Thank you, Bob. And your entire panel for a great beginning to the symposium. And I know I speak on behalf of everybody here when I thank you for making St. Louis your second home and providing the continuity and expertise with your transition from the director of NGA to helping lead the cause for geospatial here. We're very proud to be able to continue working with you.